Okay, so then what makes what makes a petition good enough to not have to see the judge?
So basically, all right, so number one, your income is accounted for, your expenses are properly accounted for, all your assets are properly accounted for with exemptions, right? And then you don't have any troublesome issues. Like let's say if you have a pending personal injury suit and you file a Chapter 7, they're not going to give you a discharge because they may give you a discharge today and then 5 years later you may get $1 million settlement and your creditors don't get paid. So you're just gonna hold it in bankruptcy during that period. So as an attorney, you want to make sure that issues like that don't exist. Or if they're set to inherit $1 million next month, that you don't file a bankruptcy and then the trustee has to go and claw that money back, right?
And like sometimes it's not even your fault. Like sometimes you'll file bankruptcy for someone, and a month later, their parents will die and they'll inherit a ton of stuff, and all of a sudden your case is all messed up.
Yep.
And there's like a lot of things you have to do now, work with a trustee and things like that.
Okay. All right. So these exemptions, because you brought them up several times already. Like, what are like the top exemptions? What makes an exemption qualify as an exemption? Like
the first thing I think I'll let you go.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta put whether it's gonna be state or federal exemption first of all, because in New York you get both state and federal, and it depends like what the goal is of the proceeding. Mostly, if it's foreclosure related, I use state exemptions. And if it's a non-foreclosure, I'll use, depending again. For example, federal has a larger, I think, personal injury lawsuit, right?
Yeah, in the wild card, yeah.
So federal might have bigger exemptions for some things, but state has a way bigger exemption for the house, for example. So that's why when I generally do foreclosure, I'll generally use state exemptions because it's way bigger for the house. Right now it's like 175,000, I think, but it keeps going up every year. I think in California it's like 300,000 or something because of the value of the houses. But basically the exemption is like stuff you owe the trustee cannot go after. You obviously you don't want them to sell you like TV, clothes, or whatever. And generally that's easy to exempt. Like you'll have enough in a statute to exempt all those little things. Basically the exemption is used for the assets that you put the exemption, the trustee cannot go after it. And then it's never going to be sold and never going to be like the trustees are not going to be able to get rid of it, and you'll keep it regardless.
So what a car I drive to work, is that going to qualify?
So this is how exemptions work, all right? And to break it down, let's say your home is worth $600,000 and you owe $500,000 on the home, right? So you're probably going to use the state exemptions because you get like Alex said, like you get 175, what's called a homestead exemption. So that means that $100,000 in equity, trustee cannot touch it, right? So we use that a lot especially in chapter 13. But like, let's say I have a basic chapter 7, right? Person comes to me and they say, hey, look, I have all this debt, but I do have a car, right? And, let's say you owe money on the car. I don't know. The car is worth, I don't know, $20,000 and you owe $15,000 on it, right? So I may use a federal, what's called the wild card exemption, because I think it gives you up to like $11,000, just general exemptions. Mm-hmm. So I'll say, okay, I'm going to exempt that other $5,000 so the trustee can't sell my car and then pay the debts off. And you basically use it on other things as well. That's how it works. So let's say you have a very nice MacBook, top of the line, you just bought it, it's $3,000. Then you can use that exemption on that MacBook so the trustee doesn't go and sell it. Or just like, you have a very nice gold chain that's worth a few $1,000s. You can use it on things like that up to a certain point.
So what other exemptions are there? What are the most common exemptions besides the ones you've named before?
Well, Peter talked about the homestead because we do a lot of foreclosure cases again. The homestead is for the home, but one exemption that Peter brought up is the wild card exemption. Mm-hmm. Basically, you can use it for anything. There's special exemptions like for like everything. There's for electronics, for this, for car, for that. Wild card is whatever is remaining you can use for anything Whatever else you need to exempt that you don't want a trustee to go after. And let's just say, I've never seen trustee go after like TV or anything like that. Your petition has to be like proper, everything has to be proper. But I've never seen trustee go after like something small like that. Because it's also not worth it to them sometimes. Like even if you didn't exempt something, but the equity in it is like $1,000, they'll spend more money retaining an attorney. So even like if the exemption doesn't cover something fully, most likely they're not gonna go after it because they like when there's a lot of assets, a lot of like stuff, they'll go after it for sure. If it's little and they know like you're from legal services, they're not gonna bother.
All right. So now, like, let's say Chapter 13, you want to repay off your debt. You use a homestead exemption. How does that factor in? Does that mean it's almost like that portion of the debt you don't have to pay back?
No.
So how does exemption work in that situation?
It works in that situation because what happens is, so homestead exemption only applies to a home in which you live, right? So some people try to file like a Chapter 7 and they have like a second home, which there are things you can do with that, but basically only applies to the home in which you live. But let's say you have too much equity. Let's say you have equity in a home, right? It stops the trustee from saying, "Wait, you have equity in the home, and you're not paying these debts back." Then basically the trustee would sell off the home, and well, that's mostly in a Chapter 7 context. But in a Chapter 13 context, I mean, it could be the same thing depending on like your debt level, and then also what you're doing in your plan. But we generally don't see that happen.
Like in a 13, you can choose to sell your house. So that might be useful for you to have that exemption so you can pocket the money for yourself instead of paying the creditors. So if you choose to sell your house in the Chapter 13, that exemption is that extra money that you're going to take for yourself instead of paying everyone else who you owe the money to.
Oh, okay.
Does it make sense, kind of?
Yeah, I guess so. But like,
generally, it's more useful in the 7, just so the trustee wouldn't sell the house. In the 13, let's say your plan is a 100% plan, you're paying everyone back. It doesn't really matter that much because you're paying everyone back. The trustee is not going to go after any assets because that's why the 341 matters. Like if you put your Chapter 13 plan as 100% plan, he's just going to ask you a couple of questions, but because you're paying everyone back, he's not going to like get too deep. But now if you're only paying like 50% back, he's going to demand like every single receipt for every single thing that you're alleging in the petition and things like that. So a lot depends on like what you're doing in bankruptcy as well.